Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Baker Institute. We're excited here to all the people who are in person, and then also I know there's some people that are also joining us online. My name is Kirstin Matthews. I'm the fellow and researcher in the Baker Institute. I'm the director of the Science and Technology Policy Program here. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to our inaugural Joni Sue Lane Rice University Lecture on Women in Science and Technology. The event is funded by the Lane Family Endowment, which was established by Neil Lane, Joni's husband, and their children and grandchildren, with generous support from Rice colleagues and friends of the family. Because Joni loved Rice, Neil and their family wanted to do something to acknowledge her contributions and affections for the university. The goal of the endowment is to recognize and amplify the vital contributions of women in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, or STEM as we like to call it. Funds will support lectures like today's with Dr. Córdova, as well as when the endowment grows a little bit more, it will support other activities at the Baker Institute, providing a platform for researchers, policymakers, and industry leaders to share insights and foster discussions that help shape future developments in science and technology. I'm honored to welcome everyone this evening to the event to recognize Joni Sue Lane, as well as Neil Lane, my longtime colleague at the Baker Institute. Joni was first and foremost a strong supporter of Neil and reminded me that she was his #1 fan. I think I got to be #2, but perhaps I was actually 9 after his kids and his grandkids. Joni was a groundbreaker in a time when few women went into careers in science and mathematics. Joni and Neil were both born in Oklahoma City and met in high school. They studied at the University of Oklahoma. And were married in 1960. Shortly after they graduated, Joni in mathematics and Neil in physics, they got married. Joni worked in computing while Neil pursued his Ph.D. in physics at the University of Oklahoma, graduating in 1964. After his postdoctoral research stints at Belfast, Northern Ireland, which sounds like it'd be really interesting, and Boulder, Colorado, they came to Rice University in 1966. By then, they were a family of 4 with daughter Kirstin and son John, who joined us today. Up there. While Neil began his teaching and research as an assistant professor of physics, Joni continued her work in computing, becoming a systems programmer for what was then Rice Computational Laboratory, and today is the Center for Research Computing. Neil describes her work in his oral history, which we have an archive for if you're interested, as helping people like me with their computer problems. Joni started this work when computers were primitive, sluggish, and could be the size of a small building, and code was written on punch cards. To quote Neil a little further on Joni's work, you know, when you're sure the computer was screwed up your code and you needed someone to go to, and you're not in a good mood, Joni Sue was the go-to person for many, many years and loved her job and Rice. Considering the number of issues I have each week with my computer, I'm sure Rice faculty and staff kept her very busy and appreciated her help. In 1993, Joni and Neil moved to Washington, D.C. for Neil's nearly 8-year sabbatical, where he ran the National Science Foundation and was the director of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy as President Clinton's science advisor. I met them both after they returned to Rice after 2001, having just finished my own Ph.D. in biology just across the street at UT Health. I believe Neil was planning to retire soon after I started, but I talked him into staying much, much longer, and then using of his so-called retirement time to hang out here doing public policy. However, this was a man who, when his former research students wanted to celebrate his 65th birthday, he decided to have a science policy conference instead, which was really my first major activity at the Baker Institute. But I did promise Joni early on that while I often distracted Neil with policy work, I would not make him travel anymore or take away time from his family. I wouldn't put up any barriers when he wanted time away, such as his annual trips to Hawaii with his kids and grandkids, which I was extremely jealous of. I wanted to go too. His time with Joni and his family, they always remained his first priority. Unfortunately, Joni is not able to join us today. She is in hospice care with advanced dementia. We are pleased she is receiving excellent care at Silverado Herman Park Memorial Care Community, though. I know that I'm not alone in remembering her fondly. I still have the blankets that she made for each of my children when they were born. They were used to wrap them when they were cold and still sit on their beds today. I'll always feel grateful and honored to have known her and have shared Neil's time with her, just a little bit, and with the Baker Institute to help make the Science and Technology Policy Program for what it is today. Tonight's lecture, though, is focused on another remarkable woman whom Neil and Joni have always admired, whose distinguished career in science is incomparable, Dr. France Córdova. But to help introduce her and moderate questions, we have the Honorable Neil Lane, who needs no further introduction.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here and for watching online. And thank you, Kirstin, for your kind words about Joni Sue, and also for letting me hang around with you guys. And it's kind of, the Baker Institute's one of my favorite hobbies these days. And a lot of that has to do with meeting folks like all of you who are here this evening. Many of you may not know that Kirstin and the Baker Institute, led by Ambassador David Satterfield, who cannot be here this evening, was honored by the Immunization Partnership for Kirstin's work with her students and colleagues in kind of getting the facts out to the public, and in particular the Texas legislature. Any legislators here? Okay. About the importance of vaccinations. It was an extraordinary honor, and congratulations again, Kirstin, for that. It is now my honor to introduce this evening's speaker, the inaugural speaker of the Joni Sue Lane Lecture Series, France Córdova. France is currently president of the Science Philanthropy Alliance, which advocates and influences support for science and scientific research. Kirstin mentioned that this lecture is part of the Baker Institute Civic Scientist Program, where scientists who have notably contributed not only to science, but to public service and engagement can share their life story and their wisdom gained through experience. Dr. Córdova is a model civic scientist, and I think most of us would agree without peer. Her generosity in presenting this first Joni Sue Lane lecture is deeply touching. Thank you, Franz, for doing so. You've read a brief summary of Franz's extraordinary career, where she's rightly credited for major accomplishments in astrophysics, university teaching and administration, and service to government, philanthropy, and the scientific community. And a short biography, of course, is in the program, but let me just touch on a few highlights, I would say. Her observation to observational and experimental astrophysics was her research area, and particularly the study of X-ray and gamma ray sources in spaceborne instrumentation. And that all led to, obviously, a new understanding of how the university works in extreme environments, let's say just very hot environments in the universe. She led NASA's observation missions and published 150 papers or more from her research. Much of that research was done during a decade. She served as deputy group leader of the Space and Astrophysics Group at Los Alamos National Laboratory, and then time at Pennsylvania State University, where she was head of the Department of Astronomy and Astrophysics. Early in her career, she was coaxed to accepting major administrative responsibilities, often the first woman, sometimes the first Hispanic, sometimes the youngest, to serve in these high roles. France first served in government as chief scientist for NASA. She served as chancellor of the University of California at Riverside, which you know is the head of the campus, and then as president of Purdue, which has to be an extraordinary challenge, where she established, among other things, the School of Health and Human Sciences. France led the National Science Foundation as director for a full 6-year term, which is rare for directors in history. And she earlier had served on the National Science Board, heading up the Budget and Strategy Committee. It's important to keep in mind that while these major leadership roles are honors, unquestionably, they're also pure service, requiring sacrifice and commitment. France has contributed to science in the nation in many other ways as well. She has served on and chaired innumerable advisory, evaluation, and review committees, including being chair of the Smithsonian Board of Regents, founding chair of the American Institute of Physics Foundation Board, which has named an endowment for Franz Córdova. She's a member of the Caltech board and many, many others. Among her many other honors, she's an elected member of the three most distinguished science organizations, academies, the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, the National Academy of Sciences, and the American Philosophical Society. She received NASA's highest honor, NASA Distinguished Service Medal. She was twice selected by Forbes as one of their 50 over 50, are you really over 50, women for their leadership and their contribution to society. In the last one of those honors, I think, was in the area of innovation. And she's been awarded 15 or more honorary degrees, and still counting, I would say. Franz has recently given commencement talks at Stanford, Caltech, and MIT, and other universities. Franz received her Ph.D. in physics at Caltech, her Bachelor's of Arts in English Literature at Stanford, cum laude. I met Franz in 1993 when we both moved to Washington at about the same time. Franz arrived at NASA totally prepared to take that leadership role. I arrived at the National Science Foundation trying to find my parking place. We worked together ever since. It's a great pleasure, and please join me in welcoming the Honorable Franz Córdova.
Great. Thank you so much, Neil. Gosh, it's such a pleasure to be back at Rice. I've been here a few times, and it's always just been terrific. A beautiful university here, and a great one. It's so inspiring. I just had a wonderful day today visiting with students and with faculty and administrators. You just should be very, very proud. Well, it's an honor to be here giving the first Joni Sue Lane Lecture, Celebration of Women in Science, and celebration of the remarkable partnership between Neil and Joni, whose shared commitment to science and to the public has touched so many of us. So here's on my first slide, I have a quote from one of the press announcements I read that people said about her helping people was her joy. About Joni Sue. And so I show a picture from the announcement of this lectureship. So thank you to all of you who have sponsored it. So my talk tonight, and let me see if I can advance the slides. That's always the hardest part of these talks, isn't it? Yes. A Life in Science, Policy, and Purpose. So this title makes me smile because it took me a long time to arrive at all three of these, and I want to share a little bit of that journey with you. And I believe, Neil, after I give my formal remarks, that we're going to sit over here on these nice chairs and have more of a conversation, right? And that will be an invitation to any of you who have questions to do so. Okay. So I didn't start out intending to be a scientist, although I was interested in being a detective from reading Nancy Drew mysteries. And science is, after all, a real detective story. So I was an English major, as you heard, in college, who loved words and stories and fairy tales, which I've often held, and I read a lot of fairy tales. Of course, I read them to my children, now my grandchildren, that fairy tales really address deep human motivations and the consequences of those. So I have lots of examples. Literature and religion, and I was very involved in both, ask about why we're here, things like what does being mean. And it wasn't until later, after college, that I realized that science was another way of asking those same questions through observation and experiment and accumulating evidence. Science addresses the mysteries that literature and religion introduce. So policy came even later. When I became NASA's chief scientist, the first woman to do so, I learned that discovery often doesn't happen in isolation. It's shaped by budgets, by priorities, by people, and by the policies that link them. That was an awakening for me. Oops. And I just lost my talk, but I'm sure I'll find it in a minute. Okay. So here is a picture of, in this slide, it shows what Neil and I looked like back in those days when he headed the National Science Foundation in the Clinton administration, and I was at NASA testifying. We worked together on such things as the need for a new South Pole station in Antarctica. The National Science Foundation runs the nation's Antarctica program, and there consists of 3 facilities in Antarctica, including the only one that's at the South Pole, and it was getting buried by snow. And so we had to convince Congress, especially the Senate, that it was worth building a new facility, which we did. We visited and convinced them that there was a good reason for building a new facility. And the other thing that I always remember working on was how to work during a long shutdown, if that sounds familiar. So there was the famous shutdown, I think some of you may remember that, in 95 to 96. And I remember calling Neil from NASA because we served on these committees at the White House and the National Science and Technology Council, and asking him about what do we do? Please explain to me how the shutdown works. How do you continue to foster science during such a shutdown? So as for purpose, well, I think that's the lifelong search that all of us share. How do we take what we've learned in the lab, in leadership, and in life and make it meaningful beyond ourselves? So tonight, I'd like to reflect on that journey, how science and policy have intertwined in my own life, and what new trends are reshaping how we fund and value research, and why I believe the next frontier of discovery is as much human as it is technical. When I found my way into science after being inspired by a television show on neutron stars, so people always ask me, how'd you go from English into physics? It was really NOVA television. I just saw this special on neutron stars, had a lot of MIT scientists in it explaining how much energy is released when you drop a marshmallow onto a neutron star. And I said, that's what I want to be by the time I'm 30. I want to be a scientist, a physicist. So I found my way to MIT because I was working back east and at Harvard at the time. And then from there, just started my career in science. So when I found my way into science then, I discovered that I really wasn't leaving the humanities behind at all. Studying English had taught me how to look for patterns in language, in human behavior, in meaning. Science at its best does the same. It asks, what's the underlying story here? How do all these pieces fit together? So I carried that curiosity forward through the years of graduate school, through nights on mountaintops, collecting data on stars, and through the many transitions that followed. Each phase felt like standing at a new trailhead, looking up at a peak I wasn't sure I could reach. I've always loved the mountains, literal ones like Kilimanjaro, which I climbed on my 75th birthday, and the metaphorical kind that represent new challenges. You learn a lot from climbing. You learn about pacing yourself, about preparation, about knowing when to push and when to rest. You appreciate the power of human will. When people would say, how did you get up this peak or the other, I would say, well, it wasn't me, it was my will. You learn about trust in your companions and trust in the weather and GPS data. But most of all, you learn that perspective changes as you step up. What once looked daunting from below becomes part of a larger landscape once you gain some altitude. So that's true in life and in science. As a woman in physics and astronomy, there were times when I felt like I was climbing in thinner air. But then, as now, There were companions on the path who offered a belay. That's a term in rock climbing, which was my avocation when I was young. It's a helpful word. It's a shared sense of wonder, curiosity, and exploration, and it's a shared sense of partnership. Later, as a university president and chancellor, I came to see another kind of summit, the institutional one. Leadership is often less about scaling heights yourself and more about helping others find their own footing, clearing the landscape so that they can see what's possible. Policy entered my world quite unexpectedly. When I became NASA's chief scientist, I realized that science doesn't exist in a vacuum. When I stepped into that role, I didn't even know what policy meant. I just went completely ignorant to Washington, D.C. But I learned that science is shaped by how we organize our resources, how we make choices about what to fund, and how we communicate why it matters. Policy was unfamiliar territory to me, like a new mountain range filled with scree or crevasses, tenuous ridges, and shifting weather. But I soon learned it's where ideas meet reality. It's where our aspirations are tested against the priorities of other groups, leaders, and influencers. And that realization deepened even more when I moved to the National Science Foundation. There I saw firsthand how every dollar represents a decision, a choice to invest in people, in curiosity, and in the infrastructure that nurtures discovery. Which brings me to something quite new that I'd like to share with you tonight, something that represents another perspective, the Science Philanthropy Indicators. For years, we've had excellent data on federal funding for research, but philanthropy, which plays a growing and often transformative role in science, and has done so for over 100 years, has been kind of a dark matter. We know it's there, but discerning its roles and impact was challenging. So the Science Philanthropy Indicators Project, which is a collaboration led by the Science Philanthropy Alliance, which I lead, and UC San Diego's Policy Institute, is designed to change that. It's an online interactive platform, which I encourage you all to check out. The way to get on it is at the bottom right of that slide. It illuminates where philanthropic dollars and all dollars, government dollars, industry dollars, university dollars, universities spend a lot on research all by themselves, and philanthropy are all going in scientific research. It helps us see patterns, identify opportunities, and understand how private giving complements the public investment. And this is the first time, it's our second edition of Science Philanthropy Indicators, but it's the first time we've had a completely online version that's very interactive. You can change all sorts of parameters. Say you're want to know how oceanography is doing. Well, you just click the right buttons there and you find out who is funding oceanography and to what extent, and so on. Has a lot to say about how graduate students and postdocs are funded, not only in this country, but from other citizens from other countries who study here. So if you are interested in the history of support for science, because it goes all the way back to the 1950s, from all sectors, university, government, industry, and philanthropy, and for all disciplines, I urge you to read it online at indicators.sciphil.org. Joining the philanthropy funders world, I've come to think about science funding not just as a financial question, but as a moral and cultural one. Because behind every grant, whether public or private, is a belief in the value of discovery, of education, of communication, and a belief that technical progress should benefit all of us. If we zoom out to look at the larger landscape of research funding today, we see what we see is both familiar and new. Federal support for science should remain the bedrock. The reason the U.S. leads in discovery and innovation is because of the social contract between the federal government and universities and research institutions. Federal funding allows for large, long-term investment in early-stage research that is founded on curiosity about nature and us. Often this research yields a 10 or 100-fold return on investment, but that return can take years to result in new applications and new businesses. Today, we see the government's role challenged, and it will take our collective commitment to turn that around. Around that foundation of government support, so well documented by Neil and colleagues in the past, we're witnessing a growing constellation of private investment. Some of it comes from individuals who want to make a difference in a field they care about. Some from industries that compete globally to be on the forefront of technology. And some from foundations that recognize that fundamental science is the seed corn of future progress. And increasingly from collaborations that blur the old boundaries between sectors, the government, university, industry, and philanthropy, working together, including across international boundaries. In my job as president of the Science Philanthropy Alliance, I see a number of these multi-sector collaborations tackling huge efforts in medicine, health, computer and information technology, and much more. One example is the National Academy's policy arm called GWIPR now. It used to be called GWIR, the Government University Industry Research Roundtable, policy arm of the National Academy of Sciences. But through our efforts and demonstrating the importance of philanthropy in funding science, they have now added a P to GWIR, making it much easier to say, GWIPR. Okay, can you all say that? GWIPR, yes. So, only recently was philanthropy added, recognizing this increasing investment in science. I'm on the GWIPR Council, an enthusiast for collaboration among these sectors, all of which are essential to the research ecosystem. And this policy arm brings all those sectors together to decide what is important and what are next steps. I see, too, the enthusiasm of other countries to support the international research ecosystem and to work in collaboration. So take, for example, this year's Nobel Prize winners in physics. Here's what Jonathan Bagger, CEO of the American Physical Society, had to say. Quote, "The 2005 Nobel Prize in Physics showcases everything that works, or ought to work, about the American scientific enterprise. It was awarded for fundamental basic research that gave rise to innovative applications driving economic growth. The work was carried out at a U.S. public university by a British professor, a French postdoctoral researcher, and an American Ph.D. student. The research was supported primarily by the Energy Department, with additional contributions from the National Science Foundation, IBM, and the French Atomic Energy Agency. It's the powerhouse combination of sustained federal support, deep international engagement, and private sector investment that made this possible. Fundamental science is not remote from real life. It's the quiet engine that powers progress in health, technology, and our understanding of the world. But without federal funding and international mobility, that engine breaks down." That's what Jonathan Bagger had to say. His statement is reaffirmed by the Economics Prize given in honor of Alfred Nobel. This year it went to 3 economists who explained why we have seen sustained economic growth for the past 2 centuries. They developed an economic model of innovation. They praised the benefits of basic science that encourages, quote, creative destruction, the new overturning the old, and openness as keys to economic growth. So these are things that, of course, it would be great for everyone, public or executive branch of the administration, to take note of. A plurality of research sponsors is a healthy thing. It means more entry point for ideas, more flexibility in how we support research, and more opportunities for scientists to pursue creative directions. And it works especially well where trusted alliances are formed. But it also raises new questions about accountability, equity, and coherence. How do we ensure that private priorities align with public needs? How do we sustain long-term discovery when short-term impact often drives investment? And how do we make sure that science continues to serve society, not just markets or personal visions? These are questions that Neil Lane has wrestled with for decades, and he has modeled what thoughtful science policy looks like. Neil understands that policy is not bureaucracy, it's a form of stewardship. It's the bridge between discovery and the common good. When I think of Neil's leadership at the NSF, at the Office of Science and Technology Policy, and here at Rice, I think of a steady voice reminding us that we must communicate the value of science to citizens and policymakers alike, and that our scientific enterprise thrives when it represents our democratic values: openness, rigor, inclusion, and trust. I know that tonight, as we celebrate this lecture series in Joni's honor, we also celebrate Neil's enduring belief that science and society are inseparable. Which brings me to something I've come to believe deeply, that purpose, the third word in my title, lies at the intersection of those two forces, science and policy. Science gives us understanding, policy gives us direction, and purpose asks, to what end? Over the years, I've come to see that a meaningful life in science isn't just about discovery, it's about connection. Connection between disciplines, between countries and people, between generations. When I look at my students, my colleagues, my family, and especially the women who are finding their paths in science, I see that our purpose evolves as we do. Early on, it may be about proving ourselves. Later, it's about empowering others. And finally, it's about ensuring that the system we leave behind is more just and generous than the one we entered. That's why the new data on philanthropic giving should give us hope. They're not just statistics, they're evidence of belief, of commitment, of possibility. They remind us that we are all investors in discovery, whether through our dollars, our time, or our trust. As I reflect on Joni Sue's life and Neil's, and on the privilege of my own journey, I return to that question of purpose. What comprises a meaningful life? For me, the answer keeps shifting, as it should, but it always circles back to curiosity, creativity, and impact. Curiosity about how the universe works, creativity that makes discovery possible, and the impact that gives our work meaning to others. So I'll close with this thought. The future of science will depend not on what we know, but on why we seek to know it and what we will do with our knowledge. It will depend on whether we can keep science human, open to wonder, grounded in evidence, and guided by purpose. That's the legacy I see reflected in this lecture series, in Neil's vision, in Joni Sue's pursuit, and in all of you who are starting your journey. You're the next stewards of discovery. You're the hope that a democratic science will endure. You're the new stars, like these stars in the picture here from the Webb telescope, the new stars that are forming, not only in this image, but here at Rice. Thank you. This one here. They said to sit on this one because of my microphone. Yeah. Okay.
Well, so are we on? Thank you so much. Those incredible insights, actually. I haven't heard such a description of why we're doing this stuff.
Yeah.
And I think you really gave a great focus on that. Let me just start. First of all, let me remind everybody you can send questions whenever you want to through Google. Does everybody know how to do that? Yeah. No. Kaylee, could you give us a quick moment at the mic to explain what's going on? Where's Kaylee? I just want to make sure that everybody's included. And if you miss a question through the technology, we'll make sure we get it.
Sure, so you could just scan the QR code up that's on the screen, and then there should be a Google form questionnaire that pops up, and you can submit as many questions as you want. If anybody needs help, you can raise your hand and I'll come help you. Okay.
So we had to make sure to inject a certain amount of technology in this event. It's the only test we've got this evening, so nothing to worry about. Let me just start, if I could, asking, you've done, I always say about you, you've done everything. If maybe you haven't spent a lot of time working in industry, but you've worked with the private sector in all these other jobs in the universities and federal government and so forth. But just thinking through your career, time-wise and agency, running a couple of universities, a couple of agencies in very real terms, and now largely focusing on the private sector philanthropic. Did your view of science that we've just heard evolve during that period? How did one job influence another one, or is it a much more nonlinear process somehow? What would you say about that in your career?
Yeah, I think life in general is nonlinear, right? So, but all of those have been important highlights. As far as industry is concerned, so I've been on boards of directors of industries, utility
That's
industries and health industries. And right now I consult, I'm on the advisory board for a venture capital company in Austin. And I have a son who's in private equity, so I learn a lot from my kids. Yeah, I think it's just natural. It's nice to live a long time because you learn a lot along the way. So every job I've taken, I've really benefited from. And so people say, what's been your favorite job? And I always say the last one I had, or the current one, because you just feel more mature, like you've seen it all. You know, when something horrible happens, you say, oh, I've been there, done that. I know how to get through this one. And I think that's independent of whether they are philanthropy or industry or university. Government, you just learn by living and assimilating what's going on around you and reacting to it and working with other people. So I don't think there's a moment. I mean, there are moments when you say, "Oh my God, I really screwed up," but then you use that the next time around to just handle things differently.
You know, you can live a long time and not learn anything.
Well, I'm sure you're not the example of that.
But you're always so optimistic that I certainly understand what you say. What did English literature bring to your science?
Well, I write pretty good memos. And
AI does not write your memos?
No,
Okay.
it doesn't. It sometimes edits them though for brevity, which is important quality. Just a huge appreciation. I'm just so happy that I love literature and I read it all the time. I mean, I read real literature, not just The Economist magazine or something. I read. Recently reread War and Peace, and I just read a lot of literature just for the Middlemarch, George Eliot's book, just for the pure enjoyment of reading good language. I mean that's such a high, as is art. So I live, our main home is in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and it's the third biggest art market in the country after New York and LA. And we love art, and So that is also part of the humanities that just makes your whole scientific life richer, as well as understanding that and the process that goes into it. I enjoy talking with artists. We have a lot of, in Santa Fe, Native American artists and Hispanic artists, and so just you can enjoy art on more than just the level of connecting with their work, but also with the process of how they create it.
The question has come in here raises the issue of trust. That it's clear from the surveys that institutions have lost a lot of the trust of the general public, and while science remains in pretty good shape in terms of the profile, surveys that I know, still that, especially with COVID, that tended to slide away. But we should be always aware, I guess, is the point, that if we don't have a trusting relationship between science, however we define that, and the general public, everybody loses, in particular the public. But do you see trust as an unusually difficult problem now, or coming in the future? How should we prepare for that if we worry about it?
Yeah, I think trust, whether it's trust in just a relationship or trust in institution, bigger thing, trust in government, is always a fragile thing. It's easy to break it and just hard to get it back. So it's one of those qualities that we should really value and try to ensure that we ourselves don't break the trust that we think others have in us, and then just try to encourage it among the people that we work with and so forth. I think the business of trust and the public's trust in science is made worse right now because we have leadership that distrusts, and that communicates all the way, permeates the culture. If we had leadership, as they do in some countries, that really think that science and technology are very important and that revere their scientists. I mean, you remember what it's like going to China and some other countries, back in the day. I mean, if you were a scientist, it was like you were Derek Jeter or something. I mean, he played for the New York Yankees for a long time. Great baseball player. But I mean, they treated you like you were a sports hero, right, as a scientist. Yeah. And so I think people often, they get all worried that scientists aren't communicating enough with the public. I see more effort on the part of museums, scientists. I mean, right here at Rice, you have this great group doing all these wonderful things everywhere around the country and the world. I don't fault the scientists. I think when the leadership steps up, the leadership at the highest level, and says that something is important, then people really respect that and want to know more about it. When they say the opposite, that certain science is not to be trusted, that puts a little seed of doubt in everybody's mind. It's like somebody said, did you see what went on down the corner? Did you see Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so? It puts, even though you may care about them tremendously, Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so was seen walking hand in hand down the corner, you kind of, you ask questions. So I think we really, we need to insist that leadership not only respects science, because I know they do, they care about certain priorities in science, but that they communicate their respect for the process of science. And that would go a long way to reaffirming public trust in science. That's my feeling.
Thank you for that. You've opened a little door, so I'll jump in and insert. This one's my fault. Okay, nobody sent this in. A lot of concern about the politicization of science. Now, from some perspective, I think politics has always been an element as long as the federal government funded science. But is it different now? What's going on, what's been going on recently, however you'd like to approach it. I have a feeling it's not the same. I can't remember a time in my growing up where the challenge, in a sense, to trust and this relationship with the larger public is as difficult.
Yeah, I think we've had very difficult periods in our country's history, and probably a lot of people in this room, at least people my age, have lived through that. And my parents and their parents living after the Great Depression, and just and then there in my generation, the Vietnam War and all. I mean, we've had really periods of strife and dissent in this country. So we have new things to have strife and dissent about, okay? But the fact that we have conflict around us is not new and shouldn't surprise us. But everything is about how we navigate through that and what the decisions we make by ourselves, with our families, with our communities is just really important now, that we affirm what our values are, what we believe in, and get others to join us and make that known. But boy, things, I mean, look at just so much misery going on in parts of the world. You know, every day I wake up and, you know, thank the Lord that we're not Gaza. We don't have, nobody's destroyed our buildings. And I mean, we have, you know, we have a lot to deal with worldwide, a lot of big issues. And yes, they are different in texture, but we have to navigate that. We have, I hate to use the word adapt, because if you adapt too much, then you can adopt. And we don't want to change adapt to adopt. But we do have to recognize that these are some things that we have to work through and not bury our head in the sand and say that we don't have any responsibility.
It's, you and I talked a little bit about this earlier, that it's very difficult to get across how science is being dealt with right now at the federal government. I mean, we have a leadership in government that really doesn't have parallel in times past. There have been a lot of leaders that various of us didn't like for one reason or another, but this current situation is different, and I don't want to draw you deeper into the politics of it, but picking up on your positive statement, there's so many people in government trying to do the right thing.
Yeah.
And it's still possible to find them and work with them, and that's what the science community is really trying to do. And I think
Absolutely.
You talked about that earlier.
Right, earlier today we've had a lot of talks. But so I served when I was appointed head of NSF. Of course, it took like many months. I don't know how many anymore, but 13 months or something to be from nomination to confirmation. Okay, so. Lost a year in there. It was a fun year because did other things, but so I just served barely 3 years in the Obama administration, and then 3+ years in the first Trump administration.
Yeah.
And a number of the people that I served with are now back in government. And I happen to think very highly of a few of those people in the science, they're in the science agencies. They were good the last time, and they're good in trying to do the right thing in this time. But they need the opportunity to shine. Thank you. And I think things are just so unsettled right now, and they're trying to find their way. I mean, it is very early in this administration.
Yeah.
And lots
Can't
has
believe
happened.
it, how early it is.
Yeah, I know. Right, there's that. So I think they will find their grounding, and as Congress will find their. I just remain optimistic that, and maybe, you know, we know it's the 250th anniversary of our country coming up here in the next year, and I'm very involved with some groups in celebrating that in many ways. So we've seen, we have all kinds of speakers talking about, you know, the constitutional conventions and the Declaration of Independence and all these things, and just reminding us, it's a great time to be reminded of how we came together, 13 different colonies, which they compared to really countries. They were so separate, which is actually why we have strong state government. You know, today still is a heritage from that time. But getting them all together to agree on principles and to agree of getting their independence and all. And I think this is going to be a period of re-enlightenment about who we are as a country, reminding us of our values of being a strong union that is by the people and for the people. So I'm glad that convergence in time has come together. And I had the treat just this weekend, on Sunday, they at Santa Fe at the theater there, we had a showing of Ken Burns' new film series, which is starting this Sunday. You can all watch it on PBS. As you could tell from my speech, because of PBS, I became a scientist, so I have great respect for that kind of communication. But they had a wonderful 1-hour film where they took from all his 12 hours. This is a 12-hour production that's starting on Sunday, 2 hours, 6 times. But they condensed it all into something like 45 minutes with little snippets from each one. And it's just a really powerful story of why we had the American Revolution and what happened during it and the role of people like Franklin and Washington and also. Anyway, I encourage us all to see it because it really takes us back to our roots, what's important.
A very important question now we get asked, I know you get asked all the time, especially by young people who are thinking about their careers.
Right, yeah.
So any encouraging words about choices of, first of all, for undergraduates, choices of what to do next, and then for those who are already done their graduate study, what to do after that. I know we have some wonderful young nurses to be in here, and they made those choices. My granddaughter, my son's daughter, is a nurse, and that's a great career. But more generally, everybody can't be a nurse, and I wish you could. I wouldn't have been good at it. There are lots of other possibilities, and it looks kind of grim for some of the choices.
Yeah,
the attacks on the universities and the
Right,
pressure
yeah,
under which universities are under. What about a career in traditional academic life? Or more generally, how do you advise young people who?
Well, we had a
making
good
this-
session today. Is anybody here from that session with a lot of young women graduate students and about those kinds of questions? I just think in the end you have to follow your heart. You have to see where gravity pulls you and go after it because your passion is the truest thing that you have. And if you follow that and don't be distracted by somebody else's idea of what you should be, that's that old saying from Shakespeare or somebody, to thine own self be true. If you follow your own compass, I think you will come out just fine. Well, when I started as a physicist at Caltech, nobody could believe it because I had never had calculus, I hadn't had, physics class, et cetera. And the professors just put me to it, told me, what courses to take. And there were 20 in that class of physics, one other woman, myself, and then guys. And at the end of the time, several of the men who had been in physics for years and years and years had left, abandoned their careers because that wasn't them. They were just tired of it. It was too much work for their time. And just those of us who thought it was the most important thing in the world to become a physicist survived the program, right? I never thought it was a hard program. It was challenging, but there was just more of me that wanted to go in that direction. So that's what I urge young people to do. I know it's hard that there are many barriers, but there always have been, and there's also a lot of opportunity, right? With all the new technologies we have, you can go out there and create your own company for a while. And I see a lot of people jumping from one sector to the next sector. They go into industry for a while, then they go to the university because they have certain skills that the university appreciates that they've learned there, and and back and forth. And I think that really beats having a strictly linear career where you do the same thing for your whole life, is when you're just open and flexible into trying out new things. So, and maybe that's just my optimistic self coming in.
You and your husband climb mountains, technically climbing
Right.
mountains, and it
Yeah.
can be painful. And is this like climbing a mountain? I mean, why do you climb the mountain? I mean, mean, that's the famous question.
Well, I think I talked about that a little bit. I'm very goal-oriented, and so ever since I read Ernest Hemingway's Snows of Kilimanjaro, how many people have read that?
Yeah,
Anybody
yeah.
here? I just thought, yeah, I'm gonna climb Kilimanjaro, and so then the problem was so my husband has just had more physical difficulties of the last few years. So it was clear, I mean, he can go hiking with me, but he couldn't do something like that. So the hardest part for me of doing that was leaving him at home, okay?
Yeah, okay.
And sometimes, if you really have a passion for it, and you talk nicely to your husband, and you kiss him goodbye, I'm gone. And so I just had to do it on my own. Of course, I dragged my youngest brother with me, so I did have family on the mountain. But we grew up. We met. People say their marriage ended on the rocks. Our marriage started on the rocks. So I was on the cliffs above the Rio Grande River and Los Alamos. The Rio Grande River goes nearby there. And he swung over on his rope to me, kind of Tarzan style. And I just thought he was an idiot. And but anyway, we ended up married very shortly afterwards, actually.
Well, you had to get married, right?
Yeah, no, we didn't have to.
A lot of us didn't start our relationship that way. I mean,
Yeah.
well, I don't want to take a show of hands, but this lecture, of course, is to honor, yes, my wife, and women in science and technology. Science has made a lot of progress, I think, in acknowledging and supporting women in research and other activities, private sector, universities, and so forth. We're not there yet, maybe, some of us think, but what are the challenges that still remain that should be attended to?
Well, childcare. I mean, numero uno is childcare.
Yeah.
I have a daughter and a daughter-in-law, and they both are not working now because they're taking care of babies. And just, and it's not even that they can't afford it, although affording is a big thing. But it's a question of trust in our institutions, that they don't think that they're the right institutions around where they want to leave their children. And so they'll go back to work, but they will have lost a period of time, which is kind of a crucial period when you're in your 30s, of working. And so I think this country, unlike some other countries which have a much better child care programs, is really remiss, and yeah, it just makes enormous difference. So it hurts me to see that, but yet the other part of me is saying they're doing the right things. So I never, but I feel sort of embarrassed because we just dumped our kids off at 7 a.m. and picked them up at 7 p.m. And I think, what kind of a mother was I? But I was a driven mother, and and that was, anyway, I was who I was, so I have to.
But you, in your early life, you were kind of a mother, right? You were the oldest of
12
how many?
children. 12 children.
12 children.
Yeah.
And so you had a lot of experience.
I had a lot of experience, yes. Yeah, I never thought I would have children of my own because of that.
Because of that. Yeah.
But I did.
It does happen.
Yeah.
Let me ask something different here. There certainly has been a lot of discussion and concern, I would say, in the larger science community about the movement of science from basic, pure,
Right.
curiosity-driven, all those words, to more applied, shorter
Right.
term, more impact on society, more ability to promise a product or a company or wealth creation somewhere. What's your sense about how that's been going? Have you seen such a trend, even at National Science Foundation, let alone the larger
One
nation?
doesn't have to have a sense of it. One can look at the data. So I showed the cover of our Science Philanthropy Indicators data. You go into that, and you can click on applied and basic, and you can see the graphs going up, and you can see, and for any agency, including NSF, and you can separate them all out, and you see that everywhere applied trumps. Excuse me, trumps the basic research and funding. The curve. And the first derivative is just bigger for applied research. Even when there's more basic research in a certain camp than applied is kind of catching up and going by. So this is not really new. Okay, there's always been an emphasis, and you know from when you served, and we talked about some of the gentlemen that were in charge of the various committees yesterday, that there's always been this kind of contest between basic and applied, and the desire to have more translational research and get stuff to market faster and everything. Well, now there's a lot more opportunity to do that, of course, than there was before. But I think, again, it just comes back to leadership. We have to have people in Congress that really understand the power of basic research and what it's given back to us, have great examples of how important it's been, and really get in there and fund it, just instead of just saying it, actually fund it. I remember meeting Newt Gingrich early on in my NSF thing. He invited us over. I went with my chief of staff, who's now, by the way, running things at NSF, is in charge. And Newt said that his biggest concern about his time in office was that he takes credit for raising doubling the NIH budget, but he said, I should have also doubled the NSF budget.
Yeah.
But he just wasn't in there long enough to do that, and all the gears weren't in motion. So I have hopes that somebody comes along who's possessed by that and makes it happen. Because as you know, they're individuals. Senator Mikulski was an individual. Newt Gingrich was an individual. There are people in Congress that can be just real powerhouses and can move mountains, and we need some of them right now. We need that
Move
vision.
some mountains.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I think, of course, we both worked with all of these people, Republicans and Democrats, and it's true, Rockefeller on the Democratic side and Mikulski,
Right.
Powerful force, right?
Right.
And had my issues with Barbara, but every day is not fun with members of Congress,
Yeah.
I think.
That picture of me testifying, that was in front of Mikulski
Oh,
when
was
I
it?
was chief scientist. And I'll never forget that. It just gives you an insight into how Washington works. She was screaming at me. She said, Dr. Córdova, AXAF or Cassini, which one should we take away the funding for? AXAF turned out to be the Chandra X-ray telescope, big, expensive billion-dollar thing. Cassini, another, Saturn, going around Saturn, big, expensive telescope. And she wanted me to say, as chief scientist of NASA, we don't have enough money, so which one should we cancel? And she kept saying, and I would say, well, AXAF is so great because it does this, and Cassini is so great because it does that. And she says, no, Dr. Córdova, that's not what I asked you. I said, AXAF or Cassini, which one should we cancel?
Yeah.
So anyway, I was terrified, so I went back to NASA. And I asked my boss, Dan Golden, who's head of NASA, I said, oh, that was so unnerving. I said, what would you have said? And he said, oh, France. He said, this is all theater.
Yeah.
I said, what? And he said, yes. He said she had a message to give to her fellow senators,
Right.
all of whom had a favorite amongst those,
Yeah.
of that we got to get together and get more money if we're going to get both of those up in space. And so then I learned how much theater was in those hearings,
Yeah.
right? As
Yeah.
you know well.
That anecdote just said it's so good, I think, in terms of capturing this whole situation with the Congress, is that often, even before you go up and shake hands to the members, before your hearing starts, and some Republican one, as a Democrat, some Republican will say, now, Neil, I'm going to really give you hell today, but don't take it personally.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you very much, Senator. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
I want to thank you for all your questions. We didn't get to them, and let me just ask France if there's any final comment you would like to make. We've made good use of our time, and it's just wonderful to have you with us.
Well, thank you for inviting me back. I really appreciate it.
Thank you all.